Deputy Speaker, this is particularly prevalent now, these lung diseases, in younger Australians, often mostly males, employed as stonemasons, and particularly in the engineered stone industries. In my electorate of Hughes, I have a lot of my electorate is employed in the building and construction industry, and as a result, I've been approached by constituents to speak on this bill.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in support of these two bills, the National Occupational Respiratory Disease Registry Bill of 2023 and its consequential amendments bill. Deputy Speaker, these bills are in response to the growing incidence of occupational lung disease that is now becoming quite prevalent, particularly in the building and construction industry, and particularly a disease that we are unfortunately becoming all too familiar with, which is silicosis. There are a number of other lung diseases that this bill does seek to address as well, and I will be referring to those. At the outset, Deputy Speaker, this is particularly prevalent now, these lung diseases, in younger Australians, often mostly males, employed as stonemasons, and particularly in the engineered stone industries. In my electorate of Hughes, I have a lot of my electorate is employed in the building and construction industry, and as a result, I've been approached by constituents to speak on this bill. And I also recently met with a new business that's just started up in my electorate. It's called Art of Marble. It's located in Moorebank. And the business owner, Jerome Lafforgue, spoke to me very recently about occupational lung diseases and asked me to support his employees and those within this sector. So these bills, Deputy Speaker, will create a legislative framework to establish and manage the National Occupational Respiratory Disease Registry, delivering on a recommendation of the National Dust Disease Task Force. And I was present today in this place when I heard the member of Swan speaking. And while I agree overall with the comments that the honourable member made in relation to her investigation of the legislation and the way that she spoke about it, I think it's important to note, Deputy Speaker, that the bills that have been built on the work of the former coalition government, which first established the National Dust Disease Task Force in 2019. This task force was set up to investigate the growing number of silicosis cases in individuals working particularly in the engineered stone industry. And at that stage, the coalition government committed over $16 million to establish that task force, and then also included funding to address key recommendations from its final report. And that is where these bills had their infancy. So this package of legislation, Deputy Speaker, builds on a former coalition commitment to address the increased incidence of silicosis and other occupational respiratory dust diseases in Australia. The legislative package overall demonstrates a coalition support to continually improve occupational safety of Australians, and I do disagree with the member of Swan's, respectfully disagree with the member for Swan's comments that it is a Labor government only that supports rights of workers and a safe workplace. Coalition governments have been equally, if not more so, supportive, and particularly in this space. There has also, Deputy Speaker, been tremendous support from business groups within the engineered stone industry, demonstrating that businesses, many of whom are small businesses, similarly prioritise the safety of their employees. So, Deputy Speaker, the way that the bills are framed, the National Registry will require respiratory and occupational physicians to notify diagnoses of occupationally caused silicosis, including any exposure details, and will allow for voluntary notification of other occupational respiratory diseases. The National Registry will also capture respiratory health data to aid the detection of new and emerging threats to workers' respiratory health, prevent further worker exposure inform incidence trends and assist in targeting and monitoring the effectiveness of interventions and prevention strategies. And these were all recommendations that had come out of the initial task force. The consequential amendments bill then deals with protected information and privacy issues that relate to the freedom of information legislation, and that bill is also supported. The bills have been through many stakeholders. The scope, design, contents and operation of the National Registry have been discussed with representatives from peak medical professional bodies, as well as representatives from each of the state and territory governments, and consultation on an exposed draft of the bills with key stakeholders included physicians, other health groups, the states and territories, industry groups, business groups and unions, and this was all undertaken last year. So the purpose, if I just move now to the purpose and structure of the bills, the occupational lung diseases that will be covered by the National Occupational Respiratory Disease Registry, or Registry as I'll just refer to it, are respiratory conditions that through occupational exposure to a hazard are associated with specific diseases. And that hazard can come in various forms. It can include dust, microorganisms and gases, and they've been linked to a number of conditions. There are three broad conditions. They are pneumoconiosis, such as asbestosis, silicosis, and the coal workers' pneumoconiosis. I don't have medical training. That's not obvious by my pronunciation, I'm sure. But the coal workers is often known as the black lung disease, and it includes chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and also lung cancer. So the number of people that are living with these occupational lung diseases in Australia is unknown, although what is known is that that rate is growing, and there are several factors that can impact the identification of occupational lung diseases. One of the issues with diagnosis is that often with chronic silicosis and asbestosis, they may not be diagnosed for many years after the initial exposure, and therefore it is very important. That's why the work of the task force and these bills are very important, because they will help to identify and change behaviours within the workplace to ensure that as far as possible that workers within these industries are not contracting these diseases. And what has particularly come to the forefront in recent years has been the re-emergence of silicosis, and it is caused by an inhalation of crystalline silica. And this is, as I've pointed out already, this is seen particularly in the engineered stone sector now, and with the recent broad increase in householders want this stone in their kitchens, in their bathrooms. So we just need to ensure that this can still be available to them, but done in a way where workers working within those industries are not exposed to chronic lung conditions. And if I just turn now to some of the statistics on these diseases, which are not great, the Cancer Council has estimated that approximately 587,000 people had occupational exposure to silica dust in 2011. Based on that figure, the Cancer Council estimates that around close to 6,000 people will go on to develop lung cancer in their lifetime due to that exposure. And researchers have now estimated that about 1% of the Australian adult population in 2016, approximately 10,400 people, will develop lung cancer as a result of exposure to silica dust in their workplace. So clearly these numbers are alarming, Deputy Speaker, and something that we need to address. So when the task force was established in July 2019, it provided initial advice to the then Minister for Health, Professor the Honourable Greg Hunt, in late December of that year. There were various findings and 5 early recommendations, and I'll just deal very briefly with those early recommendations, which are now finding their way into this legislation. So particularly the task force said that what was very important was that there was a prevention strategy developed and implemented, an initial education campaign, and that was also implemented. There needed to be a national approach to capture data information collection and sharing, and research to better understand accelerated silicosis with an aim to improve prevention and treatment options. And this is what through the establishment of this registry, that is what the registry does attempt to adopt the recommendations of that initial task force. So, Deputy Speaker, to conclude, the occupational health and safety of Australian workers is of utmost importance to those on my side and also to the business community who employ these workers. The building and construction industry is an extremely large employer throughout our country. It's a large employer throughout my electorate. It drives productivity within our country. Where we have now an identifiable occupational risk to those working within the engineered stone industries, particularly in terms of respiratory diseases, which diseases are preventable although not curable. It is therefore more than appropriate, it is essential that in this place we do all that we can to address these unknown risks and look at future protection of workers within these sectors. The establishment of the National Respiratory Disease Registry and the subject, which is the subject of these bills, will build on the task force's early work and will assist with the prevention of these chronic and dreadful diseases into the future. For all those reasons, Deputy Speaker, I commend these bills to the House.
I thank the member for Hughes.